After 30 years of national security experience, you learn that very few things happen by accident. One event can be isolated. Two become suspect. Now we have 3 instances just this year where the people of Camp Liberty and Camp Ashraf have come under significant attack on top of the previous tragedies that occurred in recent years. 5 attacks do not represent a coincidence. They are a military campaign. We can no longer pretend that the government of Iraq is a mere bystander in this unfolding tragedy. We are not dealing with happenstance. We are dealing with conscious decisions made by Iraq, and those choices place the residents of Camp Liberty in grave and persistent danger. As we heard from Mr. Modasan, the government of Iraq wants us to believe that there was a dispute among the residents themselves. The government of Iraq wants us to believe that there were explosives at the camp. The government of Iraq wants us to believe that they had nothing to do with it. The government of Iraq refuses to even acknowledge that it is holding the 7 hostages. As we know, these assertions are simply not credible, and we have the evidence to prove it. It would be easy to forget, what are 52 lives lost in Iraq when we hear about figures like 1,000 lives being lost every week in Syria. But the difference is that the international community, led by the United States, pledged to help these people safely move out of Iraq and out of harm's way. First, the 7 individuals in Iraqi custody should be released immediately and reunited with their colleagues at Camp Liberty. All governments, and especially my government, should demand both publicly and privately that they be released. We should push beyond the Iraqi denials and gain access to the 7 so that their conditions of confinement can be documented. And we should keep this pressure on the Iraqi government until they are released. UNHCR has been steadfast in its demands that the 7 are asylum seekers and subject to international protection. We need to demand that Iraq abide by international norms in this case as well. Second, the security of Camp Liberty is simply not adequate in the environment where additional attacks must be expected. Their security must become a higher priority. And I would ask, joining my colleagues, that the United Nations become even more actively engaged in security improvements on the ground, including placing blue-helmeted personnel on the grounds of Camp Liberty itself. The facts are undeniable, withstanding the posting of Prime Minister Maliki's website, but the status quo is unacceptable. The consistent delays by the government of Iraq in allowing basic security provisions into the camp, T-walls, bunkers, sandbags, and other measures should no longer be tolerated. Security is a basic human right. The people at Liberty disarmed. The people at Liberty agreed to relocate. The people at Liberty accepted international assurances they would be safe. The people at Liberty are now under assault. The people at Liberty are now getting killed. The people at Liberty remain in danger. What is in doubt is not the courage of the people at Camp Liberty. What is in doubt is what the international community is prepared to do to support them and to defend them. Now, in recent months, as we saw civilians threatened and then killed by chemical weapons in Syria, the international community and the United States drew a red line and said this violates international norms, and for that there should be consequences. Should there not be a red line regarding the attacks on Liberty and Ashraf as well? These attacks are unacceptable and need to stop. We must uphold human rights for all, including the human rights of the people at Camp Liberty. If we affirm an international responsibility to protect, it must have meaning in this world, or if it has any meaning in this world, it must apply to Camp Liberty. Doors need to open in Europe and America. People need to be moved out of harm's way. Not someday, but today. As we all know, there is no time to lose. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President Rajavi, first of all, I wish to express the solidarity of myself and of a lot of colleagues in the Belgian Parliament with your movement. Mrs. Rajavi, we are convinced that the Iranian resistance under your leadership, with a secular platform and its commitment to democracy, is the best alternative to the ruling religious regime in Iran. This year marked the 25th anniversary of the execution of 30,000 political prisoners in the summer of 1988 in Iran. Most of them were also members of the PMOI. The victims of these executions were buried in mass graves scattered in Iran. Many, however, were buried in the Kavaran cemetery in Tehran. And even today, the families of these victims are still left wandering in and around the graveyard, not knowing where their loved ones have been buried. It seems like the PMOI is destined to pay a very heavy price for freedom in Iran. What happened in Ashraf 20 days ago is just another tragic example. I felt upset and angry when I learned about the attack on Camp Ashraf. I know that many of these victims were senior members of the PMOI. Some of them have even been political prisoners during the regime of the Shah. Dear friends, I share your grief, and I can say it's almost tangible here today. But I'm also convinced that you feel very proud of your brothers and sisters, the 52 over there, because of their resistance and because of their battle for the freedom of a democratic Iran. Now, each time when I meet Mrs. Rajavi, I always feel compelled to say something about the women of Iran. I admire their resilience and I admire their courage. Today, I must say I was very sad to learn of the death of Mrs. Zoran Aimi, who was the Deputy Secretary General of the PMOI. She was a political prisoner for 5 years before going to Ashraf, and she was the leader of Camp Ashraf in the last 11 months. People like Zoreh will always be remembered, and it is only the opposition of Iran that allows competent women like Zoreh to carry heavy responsibilities. Dear friends, the massacre and executions of 52 defenseless refugees is a clear indication that the mullahs see the PMOI as the only true alternative. That is why they want to destroy and exterminate you. But as history will prove, the mullahs will fail. It is just a matter of time before they will be overthrown. Our Western governments should not be fooled by the political moves of the regime and its new president, Hassan Rouhani. He just is a new phase on an old and decayed dictatorship. He follows the goals of his predecessors. Now, last Tuesday, in the Foreign Affairs Committee in my parliament, I personally questioned our foreign minister about the events in Camp Ashraf. He answered that the UN is conducting its own investigation into the massacre but that he shares the opinion that the results must be made public. I should add that our main concern at this moment is, of course, the immediate release and the well-being of the 7 Ashraf hostages. The Iraqi government must release and transfer them to Camp Liberty, where the rest of their brothers and sisters are. I want to express my solidarity with the families and friends of these hostages who are on hunger strike in Liberty and everywhere else in the world. We need to make sure that we would be able to protect the 3,000 people who are staying in Camp Liberty. So those protective walls must be returned to Liberty. And in conclusion, I will say the Iraqi government must stop playing games with the international community. And if they continue to harass and harm the refugees, the EU must reconsider its diplomatic and trade relationships with this regime. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Rajavi, ladies and gentlemen, this is not an easy time to speak when 52 of my friends, like Hussein, were executed in cold blood. Hussein and Zora were very good friends, and after their murder, I tried to count all the times we worked together, we had communications. And constantly I remembered another good memory of working with these very, very fine people. Mrs. Rajavi, ladies and gentlemen, residents of Liberty, my deepest sympathy for the atrocity that has been allowed to happen. As pointed out earlier today, many times, this was foreseeable. When I was at Camp Ashraf, I took numerous photos of the entire camp. On the north side of Camp Ashraf, where the bunker area is located, where PMOI had their vast amount of ordnance, and it is a large, large compound. Maliki put an Iraqi division and headquarters there. Division headquarters complete with tanks and all the equipment on the north side of Camp Ashraf. The assault forces, the uniforms they are wearing are identical to Maliki's Special Weapons and Tactics Forces. The tactics they are using in my civilian job when I was on Department of Energy's Special Weapons and Tactics team guarding 2 nuclear reactors were identical to the type of training that we were doing. When you look at that video footage, you see them stacked up like the Americans do. You see them carrying the weapons like the Americans' SWAT teams carry them. What you don't see Americans doing is having silencers on the end of the weapons. That was murder when somebody comes in with silencers on the end of the weapons. Also, you look at the explosives that was set up. That's where I see some real big differences. The American ordnance was there, dated 2006. You remember, MEK, PMOI turned all their ordnance over to us in 2003. You did not have access to 2006. That was issued to Maliki's forces by the Americans. Then I look at the cell phones and the wiring attached to some of the explosives. That is what we were dealing with our terrorist adversaries. Those forces, Maliki's SWAT team, combined American tactics with terrorist tactics and with their embedded Code Force trainers. You saw the double handcuffs, metal handcuff and what we call the zip cuffs, the plastic that come through holding the hands together. If an investigation was done quickly and professionally by the United Nations and forced by the U.S. State Department, we would have gone in, we would have found out who manufactured those zip cuffs, who manufactured those handcuffs. We already see who manufactured the ordnance. There is only one force in the world that could have done that attack, and that is the Iraqi military. The investigation. That investigation should have commenced within 24 hours. It should have been completed within 72, because in law enforcement we know one thing. If you haven't completed an investigation within 72 hours, the chances of getting it done right after that diminishes greatly. And now, we are 3 weeks, 20, going on 21 days since the event happened, and we're still talking about an investigation. It's time to stop talking. State Department people were afraid to leave the security of the Baghdad compound for 3 days, and finally 2 of them did go. I am willing right now to go and do the investigation at Camp Ashraf, if that's what it takes, on behalf of State Department. Where are the investigations that they called upon for the 2 rocket attacks that hit Liberty and the 2 ground assaults, which was clearly Maliki's forces there? We still don't have them. In closing, I say the U.S. State Department has defaulted, and the United Nations has defaulted on every agreement made with the residents. Meanwhile, the residents have honored every one of those agreements. On September 1st, 2013, 52 deaths and 7 hostages taken became testimonials to the consequence of UN and U.S. State Department default, and it became the price of honor paid by the residents of Ashraf. Thank you.